Our next guest is an instrumentalist and singer who has been nominated for a Latin Grammy, but she hasn't always been a performer. She's a former immigration policy specialist. Elena Fulana has come up with a unique sound by taking music from her native Nicaragua and blending it with twangy folk Americana from the United States.
Elena is a lifetime lover of music. Her band, Elena and the Los Fulanos, was formed in 2011 while she was still working in immigration policy in Washington, D.C. A year later, she left the political arena for music arenas. She's performed in concert halls like the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts and the Library of Congress. Her songs take audiences on a journey from her life back home in Nicaragua to the States and the adventures she found along the way.
Being a touring musician now versus being a former immigration policy analyst, it doesn't seem like they fit. Like one's left, right brain or whatever. I mean, it just, one seems like it's kind of really, really creative. The other one seems like it's kind of details and kind of, how does one shift from one to the other, or do they coexist nicely?
Well, I don't know. I mean, they're both parts of me, both, you know, everything that a person does in their life is kind of a segment of their own personality. I've been doing music for, since I was in middle school, just like on my own. I never aspired to be a professional musician. And so, you know, I went to college, I went to a good university, I was always a good student, and I wanted to work in nonprofits and do something good for the world. And when I moved to DC, you know, I come from an immigrant family, and even though I was born in the US, my parents went through a lot to get their own documentation figured out when I was little. And then obviously we lived here when I was born here. Then we moved back to Nicaragua when I was 8. Then I moved back to the States when I was 18, so when I was on my own. So I had, you know, I grew up biculturally, and so when I came to DC to do something good for the world, as so many people do, I found myself understanding the inner workings of immigration law in an intuitive way, sort of, you know, more than other people did. And so I realized that my bilingualism, my biculturalism was really valued in that sphere, and that's what got me working in immigration. So I guess for me, they relate because of the kind of project that I do now, which is bilingual, right, and bicultural, and really elevating and showcasing Nicaraguan and Latin American culture through music and art. And so I guess that's where they connect, is kind of this. I studied also anthropology in college, and so I think the way that cultures relate to one another is something that's always been really interesting to me, and is also something that I've really always understood innately because I grew up biculturally. And I think similar to when you learn a second language, learning a third language becomes easier because you understand how different systems work. And I think that's kind of how it is when you're from different cultures, you know. So in a lot of ways, like that interplay, the understandings or misunderstandings that people have between cultures has always been a really interesting thing to me, because throughout my life, I've always been kind of an interlocutor of cultures. Like I see where people are not understanding each other, and I'm like, oh, this is what this person means to say. This is why you don't understand each other, kind of thing.
Oh, you need to be everywhere.
Well, I don't know.
I need to take you all over the place, especially in this city. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of that. How do you think that formative period in your life, being in Nicaragua, has helped to kind of shape your music?
I mean, it's everything. I mean, those are really formative years, 8 to 18, and my parents lived there until recently. There's a political situation now there that made it untenable for them. So, I mean, it's been home for my entire life. Even before I lived there when I was little, I always knew that there was this magical place that we were from. And I mean, it's who I am in so many ways. I'm also super grateful to be American and to be able to kind of take the best of these worlds and bring them together in my own personality and my own person. But yeah, being Nicaraguan, I mean, it's interesting to be from a little place that a lot of people don't know about. And so it always feels like even amongst Latin Americans, it's like we're always like kind of pushing our way to be like, hey, we exist too, you know? And that's also something that I've taken really seriously as an artist, really the responsibility to represent my culture, because there are so few Nicaraguans that are artists, and especially in the US, especially like not inside of Nicaragua, performing for other Nicaraguans. And so it's kind of like I've taken to task, like kind of telling people what that is, because the likelihood is that the only exposure that most people that I interact with will have with a Nicaraguan culture will be through me. And that has been a big responsibility to live up to. You know, when I first started doing music, I just did songs in English and in Spanish, and they were just what I was writing. And then I realized that if I was going to be a Spanish-speaking artist in the US, that I needed to know where I was from. And so even though when I was living in Nicaragua, I was like really interested in like American pop culture, like, you know, like everybody else, I was into grunge and all the things that were happening in the US in the 90s. And I really ignored Nicaraguan music. And then when I became a musician, I was like, wait a minute, this is what sets me apart, and this is really unique, and it's really special, and it's really cool. So then I went and kind of started exploring Nicaraguan music, and it led me kind of to learn a lot more about Nicaraguan rhythms, Nicaraguan instruments, and the whole history there.
Like millions of other Americans before her, Elena's story begins with an immigrant family. Today, nearly 20 million U.S. residents can relate to the messages in her music, since Elena is a first-generation American.
What did you think you were going to learn, and what did you learn? What surprised you in that whole process of exploring the music?
Oh, so much. Well, the instrument that is most important in Nicaraguan like folk music is the marimba, the arco, which I have here. And that instrument is really interesting. It comes from the bolophone, so it comes from Africa. And it was brought to Nicaragua through African people who mixed with like what I understand to be a like kind of progressive tribe within the tribes. They like to mix a lot of stuff. And it's still the cultural center of Nicaragua, that area. And so they mixed with those folks, and they readapted the bolophone, and they made it a marimba, and it's a marimba de arco. And it used to have gourds as the resonators, and now it has bamboo. It was just kind of adapted in different ways. And I never knew, I was never told that there was a Black influence or Black culture in Nicaragua. There's people that live on the east coast of Nicaragua, and it's very kind of segregated because there's a big jungle in between. And so everything that is Black was seen to be kind of foreign. And here was the center of our rhythmic structure of our music, and the center of our like instrumentation is an instrument that comes from indigenous people mixing with Black people and giving us important cultural history, you know? And that was never something, that felt like I uncovered something. And I think that has to do with, you know, racism that exists in Latin America just like it exists everywhere else, and people wanting to disown themselves from that. But I thought it was really cool to like find that and to like really explore the marimba. And so that's why I decided to bring a marimba back to the States from Nicaragua, which was quite the to-do, but
it's not a small instrument.
It's not a small instrument.
How tough was it to get it here?
Well, I wrapped the instrument in you know those like plastic wrap things. So I did that to bring one piece, and then there's a resonator that's a very, very delicate. So I just decided, like, I just brought it on a flight, and I just didn't wrap it or anything so people would see how delicate it was, and I managed to get them to put it in the closets because it's also very big. It's like this big. Wow. It was like very nerve-wracking, but it was totally worth it because I'm one of the only people who has the instrument in this, probably in the States, but definitely in this region of the States. What's
it like to perform and introduce that to people who, like as you said, it's foreign. They've never seen it before.
Yeah, it's not like the main part of what I do with my music, for sure. I mean, I've integrated it mostly into recordings. It's hard to bring it to concerts. It's when it first got made, it was actually like a quarter pitch high. So it was like we had to tune all the instruments to it. So logistically, it's never been like the easiest thing. But I have had the opportunity to be part of like marimba shows, like things that are specifically showcasing marimba, like bringing marimba from El Salvador and Guatemala and all the different kinds, and also being able to be part of that in my own way. So, it's my way of being able to, I also was able to do a cool Nicaraguan performance where people danced and everything, and I was able to play like the one song that I could really effectively play.
Elena is introducing Nicaraguan and Latin music to American audiences. But she's also managing to fuse musical influences to make her work more universal. She's toured the world, introducing some audiences to instruments like the marimba for the very first time.
Your music has been described as bilingual Nicaraguan and Latin American folk. If you were to describe your music to somebody who hasn't been exposed to it, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I would say like bilingual Latin folk is kind of usually what I tell people. It's been my kind of tagline. I started as bilingual Latin rock, I think, but and because my first album was really a lot more singer-songwriter, it was kind of like I wrote songs on the guitar, and they were in English and they were in Spanish, and they were inspired by rock and roll, and so I would just tell the guys like, do whatever you want to do behind me playing. It wasn't very like intentional in that way, but my second album, I definitely got more like tropical about it. I added more percussion elements. We did a song with the marimba in it. I learned a new strumming pattern when it was kind of like between the first and the second album that I kind of did this Nicaraguan exploration, and so it made its way into my music, into my brain, that then produced the kinds of things that were inspired by that,
But can you talk about, what are the elements of, shifting your life into music full time? What are the elements that you just really, this is fantastic? And then I imagine there's still a piece of drudgery with each profession. What are the things that are difficult to adjust to?
Sure. I mean, touring is very hard. It's very hard. You're away from home, which is, it's a little bit like, I mean, a lot of people have jobs where they travel, and at first it's really cool and exciting, and then after they've done it for 2 years, they're like, I'm so done with being on an airplane, even though I get to fly special class. It's like you get into that mode where it all becomes so annoying. Things get delayed, you can't make plans with anybody, you miss everything back home. And that's really hard. And it's also like, oh, cool, you get to travel, and then you get to go to the same place twice, and the second time is not that exciting. You're like, oh, I've already been here. And but with music specifically, I mean, sometimes, I mean, it's really hard because sometimes you don't get to eat, you don't get to decide how much you sleep. I mean, it can be kind of a grueling, I don't know, pace, I guess is the word.
The other thing is you don't get to pick your audiences too, right? I mean, some days you can go on stage and like they're really into it. You can have people sitting on their hands, and there's energy that you get from that as well. What's that like?
I mean, it's definitely different. I mean, we played in Europe with the band that I toured with, Flor de Toloache. We played for older white German audiences that didn't know anything, didn't understand anything we were saying, in little towns too. And sometimes it was a struggle to get them on board. But it's, as long as there's an audience, I mean, it's harder, of course, to play for small, for like a small turnout or a sad turnout. That's a lot more destructive to your soul than like an audience that just like is kind of, because you never know. I mean, there are audiences where people they're not really extroverted about how they feel about what you're doing. And then you get off stage and they tell you that they really liked it. And, I believe them. I just think that, different cultures can be different. There are people that are more reserved and they don't, show you that they're into it. And that's fine, I mean, in some ways, like the mission of what I do with my music is to kind of showcase these different cultures, and people will connect with them in whatever ways they do. So it's easier, obviously, to perform with more enthusiasm for audiences that are more enthusiastic, but it's also cool when it's a challenge to like bring them in. When it shifts, you're like, oh, we got the audience like, halfway through the show. Things turned around and you could feel the sense of excitement.
This land was made for you and
It was Elena's passion that led her to immigration policy work and activism. Now her music is helping to reach even more people with songs that call out injustice and urge a different path forward.
So your song, I hope I don't butcher it, Pon le Fin, featured in NPR in 2017. It's such a fantastic song.
Oh, thank you.
And I love the video. It has just such an energy about it. And I want you to talk about that, just because you're walking along, you're singing this song, suddenly a band member's over here, or a band member's over there, and it just kind of, the song is pulsating and driving, and as it does so, it grows in terms of how many people are there and everything.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the concept for the video? Because it really, I think, captures the spirit of the song.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet. Yeah, this is one of those things where sometimes sometimes when I'm like, oh, how do I represent this visually? It doesn't come to me so clearly. But for this song in particular, for Pon le Fin, I definitely wanted to do a few things. I wanted to showcase Washington, D.C., not the DC that's portrayed in like all of the movies and TV where it's just government and there aren't people that live here. I wanted to show the communities and the people that live here and the activism that exists in this city. So that was one of my goals, and really to showcase the parts of the city that I know that don't have anything to do with the federal government. And then, yeah, I mean, it's a song about being empowered, standing up for what you believe in. I wrote it during the 2016 campaign, so before the elections ever happened, just because I felt as a woman, I felt kind of antagonized by the way things were being portrayed about certain women who were running. and I felt sad because part of the reason that I live in the States is because in Nicaragua, for as much as I loved growing up there, I mean, it's not a place where I can do so much because I'm a woman. Like, there's a lot more barriers there. And that's part of the reason that I live in the States, is because I have a lot more opportunity to do whatever I feel like doing here. And I just felt like we were kind of regressing in that way, and it made me really sad. And so that's where it came from. And then it became a broader, like, I started from my own perspective as a woman, which is where I've faced discrimination. I've never really been discriminated against for being Latina, because I don't really look it, so but then it became about all the other justice issues, racism, immigration reform, discrimination, LGBTQ rights, and it just kind of all kind of wrapped into one. And then I had the awesome opportunity to collaborate with Chris Bacon, who is the most DC famous person that I know. He does go-go music. He's DC bred and born, and he does progressive go-go music, and so. I wanted him to collaborate with me, and it was really, really awesome. I mean, it also helped, it added the element of DC cred that I needed, not being a native Washingtonian. And so, yeah, and it just worked out great. I worked with this director, Ellie Walton. She tends to do documentaries, but every so often I can convince her to do a music video with me. She also directed the other music video that I have is for Amor Migrante, where we talk about an immigrant mother who comes to the U.S. in search of a better life for her son, and in doing so has to leave him behind. And we showcased an immigrant from El Salvador, Rosario Reyes, who lives out in, she lives in Maryland, and she was so gracious to help us out, because that's her real story, so.
Elena, like so many other artists, watched as the pandemic decimated the music industry. Concerts were canceled, and the industry shrunk dramatically. So Elena had to find new means of getting her message out to the masses.
Was the pandemic a good thing or a bad thing for a writer? I guess because you have more time to do it, but then it's so depressing. What do you write about? Like, I'm stuck in my house and I can't, everything's a Zoom.
And I think that there's a lot of artists right now who have like pandemic songs that would have been great to release during the pandemic, but they're coming out now, and it's like people don't want to be in that space anymore mentally, I have a couple songs like that. Yeah, the pandemic was crazy and weird and hard in all ways for all kinds of people, different ways for all kinds of people. I had a lot of time on my hands, and so I started learning how to record. I started learning how to do online shows and streaming and all that stuff. I made videos. I bought cameras, lights, professional lights, backdrops, all kinds of stuff. They were kind of a lot of investments, and then the pandemic is over, and now I'm like, when am I ever going to use these again? But I learned how to do stop motion filmmaking, so with just paper, and I would cut things out and move them, and I got better at it.
Do you find it instructive to go back to listen to your old stuff, or is it painful?
Oh, it's
sometimes?
painful.
Yeah,
it's terrible.
yeah.
And I shouldn't say that because, people still listen to it and they think it's great. But, it's just like you look back at it's like looking at, I don't know, pictures of yourself from before and being like, wow, why did I wear that shirt that day or whatever, just like seeing how you've grown and especially like all the things that I've learned, not only through my own music project, but also being on tour and working with another band that's like kind of at another level. It's just, I look back and it feels a little bit cringy. I also think that there can be some paralysis that comes from feeling that, from being, it makes you afraid of putting something new out in the world. But most likely, if I do something new, it will probably be a step forward, and I wouldn't have been able to get where I am without putting out that first album and that second album, And that's how we learn. We have to be brave with our art and put it out in the world, or just finish it. Some people just need to finish their thing in their room, and that's okay too. I think art is for everybody, but I think it's really brave when people put it out for the world. It opens you up to critique, of course, but it also, puts you on the map, and it lets people know what you're doing, and it can be really empowering to do it. And so I'm going to try to push through these feelings of inadequacy and see if I can put something else out. And hopefully those feelings will only compel me to have higher standards and to push for excellence and to have a better product at the end of the day.
Well, we're looking forward to this product when it does come out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.